Native plants are the plants indigenous to an area.
Well adapted to the climate.
Well, there's this evolutionary tapestry over the course of millions of years that creates these things, and almost like a fractal sort of like recursive sense, almost like a scientific mandala.
Our potential, it's exponential.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another podcast. I'm here today with another plant lover and new friend, Dane. Dane, thanks for coming.
Howdy. It's my first time on a thing like this.
Heck yeah.
Or maybe
man.
like second or third, but like a 10-year break.
Okay. Thanks for being willing. What were the initial ones?
History thing. I mean, this must have been like 10 years ago.
Cool.
And then I was on like a political podcast like 6 or 7 years ago.
Cool. So what got you in the plant game, man? Ecological restoration and natives and all these.
So I come from kind of weird hill folk.
Where?
Who themselves, Pennsylvania, upstate New York, moved to New Jersey. I mean, it's like 100-something years ago, but it's like pretty in our blood to do things. Be like very active, very connected.
Cool, man.
Even into the modern era, there were a lot of like, you know, my family got educated in the last generation or two, but there's a lot of doing things. My grandfather was a hydrologist. My dad was a forester. My mom got her degree in biology and worked in biological research for some years, and then became a teacher. And growing up, I gardened with her. I mean, that was the first connection. I'm originally from the Northeast. There's more use of at least some natives, you know.
Really?
Yeah, you know, you have these native plants. They're indigenous to an area, often going back at least to the Ice Age. The general, like, often if it's here before 1492, there's some debate, and then there's other like political and social issues. But essentially, it's plants indigenous to the area.
Right.
The big disruption, of course, was the age of exploration.
That's right.
And of course the internationalizing of all biology.
That's it.
Sometimes they call it New Pangea, and you had all these species all of a sudden spread across the world, particularly in the tropics. With Florida, we find them going back to the 1500s, where it's just hundreds of new little weeds and stuff start popping up.
Interesting.
And I'll get to that in a bit, but native plants are the plants indigenous to an area.
Well adapted to the climate.
Well, there's this evolutionary tapestry over the course of millions of years that creates these things, and almost like a fractal sort of like recursive sense, almost like a scientific mandala.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you think we corrupted that in a lot of ways? Not to just jump right there with like taking plants on ships and going around the world.
It's beyond that. It's first of all, our scientific knowledge of a lot of this stuff up until like the 1600s, when you had the development of some lenses. Certain things started to get more systematized. You had this is like a separate thing, but it's sort of like socially you had. There was a lot of civil wars, a lot of nasty stuff. But then once the 17th century started to break into stride, you started to have the establishment of scientific societies. Things were still obviously very politicized, but it was less about finding your third son a job, and things had become more professional. You know, it's part of what leads to the scientific revolution that starts really I guess it really starts in the 17th, but in the 1800s that people are very familiar with. And so what happens, though, is that knowledge is so limited, and people are sailing everywhere. They're bringing whatever. There's something called the hothouse trade, which a lot of people are not familiar with, but like even by the 1700s in Holland, there was like a massive economic catastrophe involving tulip breeding, which it became a massive investment. So they were exchanging and doing some pretty advanced stuff with plants and greenhouses.
Totally.
Even by that time. So that's like 300 years of distorted biology.
Wow.
And what people don't realize is that these environments, when they're severely disturbed with the invasives, it'll still look green. It still looks like a forest. You might hear some birds. it becomes a monoculture.
Interesting.
It's like the environmental equivalent of like a cornfield. It doesn't do anything for life. It goes from, maybe 100 species per mile, which would be pretty high, but in a biodiversity hotspot like Florida, that's not unreasonable, to like 2 species per square mile. And just that's all kinds of invertebrates.
Dane, think about it. Would you want to live in a cornfield? Would you want to stay there for more than you go insane? Like these birds.
Only for work.
No, right. Like in these, but it's interesting to think about, man, because what you're talking about is building habitat and bringing it back to where all of these other creatures and organisms want to live there. Like it attracts them.
Oh yeah.
So how do we do that? Like today, in this developed world.
So there's a number of different approaches. Like anything, of course, right? There's lots of controversy. There's lots of soapboxes. There's lots of whatever.
But what's the play?
I'd say the basic approach. So in Florida, we have thousands of plants indigenous to the region. Florida is where the southern coastal plain starts meeting the subtropics. Starts meeting the Caribbean.
Right here.
You have during the Ice Age, the seas were much lower, and you had a continuity from the southwest all the way into Florida. That's where you have those prickly pear, those gopher tortoises, those scrub jays. Some of these species that are more familiar to us from desert environments. It's because at most places of this latitude would be a desert. We're surrounded on 3 sides by water. And we used to be contiguous with that massive desert and scrub system of the Southwest. So there's a tremendous number of species. What I like to do, and I recommend to people to get started, is you find what I call analogs. You can call it whatever you like, but they're sort of like look-alike, act-alike native species for some of the people's favorite exotics. And again, right now I'm just talking about decorative landscaping. Cool. There's lots of other layers to this, but it's, maybe you plant a pine tree instead of the Norfolk Island pine, like you see people plant all the time. Maybe, and you plant what's called a slash pine, Pinus elioti, and you see them all over. Maybe
because that is an analog, it attracts.
But it's a pine, which creates some naturalizing factors. You have the pine litter. You have the pine nuts, you have the little pine flowers, which are quite beautiful, though not particularly distinguishable. But it creates actual habitat for your shrub, for your hedge. Maybe instead of the clusia that I see people put in or other things, you put in sea grape, you put in cocoa plum, you put in, there's a number of them.
Yeah.
For whether shade, sun. A lot of times you can pull your irrigation after a while and they still look very pretty. But most of all, it's finding these places on your property. Black-eyed Susans.
Perfect.
Are like a very popular flower.
Yeah.
That's easy to get. You can get seed. There's the Florida Wildflower Foundation.
It's easy, man.
Order some seed. Put them out there. Put it in a wet part of your yard with a little bit of shade.
So cool. Black-eyed Susan.
And it's like you create these flower beds. You add in these things. And that's just a small way that you can maybe drop a little bit of the fertilizer use. You drop a little bit of the pesticide use. You put in some natives. There's a maintenance cost associated.
And just like any, but let's talk about, because it probably is minimal compared to a lot. Like
long term, it's minimal. Short term, there's a bit of an upfront cost.
Okay.
I think sometimes that gets glossed over by people and their enthusiasm to encourage people to go into natives. There's a bit of an upfront cost in terms of weeding, structuring, like your groves and your beds and certain things. It doesn't have to be perfect, not even close. But there's just a little bit of an upfront cost of thinking about what you're doing and then, weeding and maintaining for about a year or two. Once things are established and you can get a system flowing, it's more nudging and prodding and getting involved.
Like high level.
You kind of poke around. Maybe you weed one area. Maybe you plant something new over here. But you get a system going, and it doesn't quite take care of itself. But it's now you're managing a system instead of trying to manicure every square inch of some of these places I work at. You got a 2-acre property with a house that's like a half-acre footprint. Like that's a lot of land.
It's a lot of land. And no wonder it's stressful. I go to a lot of these clients' houses with golf courses and stuff, and they're fighting it.
Yes.
They're fighting it, man. But here's the thing, Dane, because I want to talk about this because we can get sidetracked quick. Here's the thing.
Like I said, I need a chaperone.
I'm here for you. We're here for each other. You were just talking about it, like the why we do it, because like you can't deny it. Black Eyed Susan's beautiful. Gaillardia's beautiful. All these natives are epic.
Gaillardia's probably not native. I use it. It's on my business card. I got to change it.
Let's talk about it. Is it because it's like northern Florida?
It's vouchered in one county well after the time period where Gaillardia is. So history and natural history and local history is another big passion of mine. History in general, love primary sources. I find with a lot of, Ron Swanson from the show Parks and Rec.
Yeah, of course.
Like I'm like a Ron Swanson type. A lot of people that are into this are like Ron Swanson types. Get really into the history. Get really into things.
Nerd out. Yeah.
Nerd out. Yeah. We know Gaillardia seed was in trade as a flower before it was ever vouchered. And we got vouchers in Florida going back to the 1700s. We have Linnaeus, the man who named like a lot of species and genuses and basically invented taxonomy as we know it. Like we have vouchers from Florida from Linnaeus, like from the 18th century.
Interesting.
Gaillardia doesn't get vouchered until later. It's native to the Midwest. It's native to the Southwest. There is a Gaillardia species that is present in, I believe, Northwest Florida.
Okay.
But the one that's popular, Gaillardia pulchella, probably not actually
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a couple.
You're gonna take it off
that.
your business card.
I'm gonna change my business card. I still use it in like designs and stuff, but
Yeah. So tell people about it. So you're getting at it. You help people integrate this cool like building habitat and like into like people's landscaping. Is that your business?
So I've done a number of things. So I guess actually, and I forgot to do this. So like I've done work at like the county, state, and federal level. None of my opinions mean anything to anyone I've ever done this work to. It's not their opinions; they're mine.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
But doing population surveys,
Yeah.
doing collecting data for like tree surveys, wildlife surveying.
Gotcha.
A bunch of different levels of stuff. I try and bring some of that to what I do, which, the first stage of the business is always these consults. And it's really trying to give people a sense of their property, what used to be there, what could be there.
Totally.
I'm big on a mix of couple things. So the first is I love ecological restoration. My real thing is kind of these novel habitats. They're not. It's not true restoration, and part of it's some of these places that have been developed for 50 years. It's unless you can get a large area. Once you're looking at 5 or 10 acres, you can do some real damage.
It's true, man. You gotta get out of the city and you can see what's possible.
If it's a smaller property, a lot of times I like to set up these habitats that are designed to have a lot of species diversity, a lot of calories for animals, a lot of mixed levels of shade, and
cool, man.
and height for shelter.
You help people plant those out.
No, I help people plant those out. The second is doing more traditional gardens and landscapes, but using the native selection.
Cool.
And then the final is, and so you've had him on, Ben Feisman, the owner of Rainy Seasons Nursery and president of the Palm Beach County Rare Fruit and Vegetable Council.
Oh, yeah.
Me and him often collaborate together. And one of the big things is bringing into these food forests, into these agroforestry setups, into these ecotourism operations, these different things, is bringing in the natives. So there's a level
Totally.
of heritage planting based on like historical planting, say for ecotourism and like historical garden design. There's a level of, for the agroforestry, is you're setting up these runs in between the trees that are designed to operate underneath shade and improve the soil health, bring in pollinators. People don't even realize, like with the caterpillars, you can see them. You can see all their little droppings, all the frass, they call it.
Right.
The same thing. It's like worm castings, or you see the millipede and centipede castings. They're producing.
That's right.
And then with so I did my PDC, like a lot of people, my permaculture design certification.
Where at?
I did it with Megan Kelly.
Cool, man.
Down in
Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale. Wonderful woman.
She's got to get on.
Wonderful
She's
woman.
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, they went up to North Florida, her and her partner.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
But or Central Florida rather. But yeah, it really inspired me. Really inspired me to become more professional. You know, wonderful woman. But it's integrating a number of these indigenous herbs, indigenous plants and flowers, indigenous foods, and indigenous landscaping practices. You know, they call it permaculture, but and this is the irony of it, right? There's always all this stuff, these arguments, these debates. It's if you go back, and there's stuff like hugelkulture. Hugelkulture's from the 19th century. I love it. I use it. People try and like make this stuff woo. I'm not going to be like gross,
Right.
but like Rudolf Steiner,
Totally.
who like,
He's a legend.
but he was like a monster. You know, I'm not going to get into it. You know, he was
Interest-
part of the Third Reich.
Yeah, interesting.
So like,
but still, his books. And
oh
stuff,
yeah, don't
like,
get me wrong. Don't get me wrong.
But
But he was
interesting,
literally a Nazi.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
straight up.
I didn't know that.
And
But like, dude, some of that stuff he talked.
oh yeah, but this is the thing. All this stuff is part of like for almost every culture. You make do with what you got.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you talk about for thousands of years. That's what agriculture really is. That's what gardening really is. That's what all this stuff really is. And it's like notable exceptions. You know, you see the you ever seen Gladiator?
Yeah.
You know how he has this massive villa and all the wheat crops and stuff?
Yeah.
So, like, part of what makes Rome so unique historically is they did stuff like that. I mean, all these
Right.
major cultures did, but it's almost like you could define them by their mass scale agriculture because everything else for every culture
Yeah.
worldwide, what the regular people did, was the same. It's flowers, it's
Yeah.
plants, it's
It's true, man.
It's-
And here's the thing, Dan. It's interesting. What you're saying is spot on. They say agriculture creates surplus, and surplus. That's what
that's
Rome
what
was.
great civilization.
We're rich. Like just like nowadays, we got gladiator events. We have time to go hang out and drink our wheat beers and whatever. Like it creates surplus, and which actually ends up leading to wars. The reason, like the haves and have-nots. So who knows if it's even the right way to do things? But
I don't think it is, but
You-
I keep
tell-
that to me.
yeah,
Look,
why-
Derek
Do you
Jensen.
think it's other reasons? We were fighting before that.
Well, so there's a man, Doug Tallamy. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He wrote a book, Bringing Nature Home. You know, I've had the opportunity to have some time with his mentor, this man, Dr. Rosenvig, and we were talking. This is a couple years ago. We're talking in this library on Palm Beach Island, and we're sipping our coffee and chatting about human history. And he's an ecologist, and you know, I'm an ecologist in the definition sense. I don't have the training yet. Some goals, some education.
Cool,
but,
man.
you know, there was a drying out in northern Africa about 2.5 million years ago. And it's around the same time we start seeing hominid groups expand in number. And then there's the drying out. And that's when we start seeing some examples of pretty nasty violence in the fossil record.
So you're saying climate has an effect?
Well, of course, but there's
Yeah.
a degree. It's intelligence combined with desperation, and you see it with dolphins. You see it
Right.
with a lot of stuff. It's part of
Intelligence
the other
combined with
desperation. And the
Interesting.
side, like we didn't need civilization to create tight bonds, beliefs to minimize violence, an attempt to keep things right. And I think that's always existed. As much as the other thing does. I mean, that's the thing. It's all duality, and
Right.
people strive for purity because it's a nice story.
You're right, man. It's like the question is like, what's the reason? What's the cause for peace? It just kind of is.
Well, and look,
You know, it's like- it's
testosterone and
interesting.
adrenaline are crazy drugs.
Yeah.
Crazy drugs, and we're just animals here on the earth. I mean,
it.
there's an aspect that
I mean, we really are like we live with this creation, you know. And I know you live in it too. You like understand it
Oh,
deeply
yeah.
like that. But like a lot of people think we're like separate in a way, but really we are part of that tapestry, don't you think?
we are and we aren't. We sure were for a long time.
What do you think, we're like evolving out of it, or
I don't know if evolving is the right word.
devolving?
I mean, this is
out
very
of
philosophical, but
it? Yeah, I like it, man.
like
What do you
Derek
think?
Jensen defines civilization as having cities. And what is a city? A city is a small unit of territory that consumes resources from outside of its specific physical presence. And that's going to mean something. You know, there's a lot of implications to having to take to
Outsourcing all this
Yeah.
bullshit. Yeah,
and
totally, man.
it's
It's interesting. And now though, Dane, I feel like this whole world's being so urbanized. don't you think?
So
What do you
98% of
think?
terrestrial landmass is directly affected by humans, and the remaining 2%. I mean, like
Interesting.
Finished a big job yesterday. We're out
Uh-huh.
celebrating from 5 to 11. I'm a little, but my friend last night, he's telling me about this girl he really liked. And he was like, "You scared her off." And I was like, "What did I say?" And he was like, "Well, it was like you were in one of your moods and you started going off about how there's plastic and bird eggs in the Arctic." And she started trying to talk about love and you got all mad. And I was like, I don't remember that. But it
That's a
sounds like
go-to,
me.
the plastic. The plastic
Yeah,
and the
it's that. Yeah, there might be 2% of the Earth left that's not affected. There's these, and I can't remember the name of the birds. They only live in the Arctic. They almost never leave the Arctic. There's plastic in their eggs in the most remote reaches of the Earth. We've done something, and people don't because it's not just the direct urbanization. It's like it's trying. There are limits. There are limits to what we can do. There are limits to growth. There's limits to what we can produce. There's limits to what we can take. But the thing that I think is really, again, I get philosophical. You go back 400 years, you have plagues, wars, horrible stuff all over Europe. And it kind of pushes them to expand and leave. And I mean horrific stuff. You're talking.
You're saying from the destruction.
You're talking, in any given European nation, you have like 10 to 25% of the population like dying in like the late 16th, early 17th century. And then it's like whatever that happened there, it's almost like that's what got brought to the world. This very like gritty, hard-nosed, like, damn it, we're going to do it, and who cares about the cost, determination to...
I mean, I get that, and I feel that in a lot of ways, and I know a lot of our audience does, and it's deep.
It's adopting a more organic, abstract approach.
So what do people eat? There are limits, you're saying, but like, yeah, I feel you. And it's a lot of that like karmic energy too from that. It is.
There's a whole thing I have there too, but
it's interesting.
Maybe don't build your nation on a Native American graveyard.
Yeah,
but,
dude, enough said. But dude, so people are hearing this, right?
Yeah.
And they're hearing this. How do they feel empowerment? Like, what does that look like? That next organic approach.
There's beautiful expression. I'm gonna butcher it. I guess it's a Greek proverb. It might just be like, when you see the meme on Facebook, it's a Greek proverb. But it goes, a society has grown wise when older folks plant trees of which the shade beneath they'll never sit, or something like that.
Yeah. Man.
But I think I plant trees recreationally. I plant trees socially. I plant trees professionally.
Yeah, man.
That's something anybody can do. You plant. I recommend two things. You plant trees indigenous to the region. South Florida, there's a lot of beautiful ones. There's enough poincianas. There's enough, enough Norfolk Island pines.
So what are some good ones people could go out and do?
Live oaks are wonderful. Cool. People love the gumbo limbos. They're deciduous, which is a little different, but it's also up by the beach. Very nice.
Totally. There's some behind the studio. Beautiful.
Beautiful. I love planting fruit trees too. And that's something that a lot of people, fruit and nut trees.
Gumbo limbo. What are some fruit trees?
Look, no joke. And I say to people, look, you got cashews, macadamias, mangoes, avocados. I got the Mantingia calabra, the strawberry fruit they call it, the Jamaican cherry. I think is a more accurate name, right? The strawberry trees from Italy. Yeah. People in California grows those. Yeah, they're nice.
That's right.
But not here. They're Mediterranean.
Those are, it gets all great. Those are all gringo names anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I try to stick to scientific the best I can because I get so confused, and I deal with people sometimes, especially in South Florida, from like all over the world, and it's like, I don't know what some Russian person who spent the last like 20 years living in the tropics calls anything, and they have no idea what I call anything. But if I say Mantingia calabra, they're like I love the jam. That's what I like.
Interesting.
Beautyberry. You'll talk about whatever, and then you mention calocarpa to like a Chinese person who knows botany, and they're like, because they have beautiful calocarpas in Asia, which are also they use for like jams and jellies and stuff. Cool. And so there's with some of the scientific names, there's a way to jump over some of that misunderstanding. That's
Mhm.
again all the gringo names. It drives me
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah.
There's the wild tamarind, live oak. Don't plant it too close to your house.
Yeah, it get big.
Buttonwood, you can plant that right up against your house. Although kind of you don't want to, but you could plant, like you can literally, so it grows in these mucky areas.
Buttonwood.
And I like the green. The silver's nice too, but make sure you plant it somewhere that's silver and gets a lot of wind, or else it tends to get
The black.
the sooty mold on its
yeah.
leaves. But the buttonwood, gumbo limbo, live oak, wild tamarind.
The buttonwood's beautiful, man. That's classic.
Slash pines are good. My recommendation, if you have an unirrigated yard, slash pines are wonderful. They don't develop the strong root system that they need if the yard is irrigated.
Interesting. They need the stress.
So one of the things I love to do. So those are like some native trees. I just strongly recommend. I mean, there's plenty of others, but those are 5, very accessible. You can find them. They're wonderful. And then mango. If you're west, try and find one that's good with humidity. If you're east, you can plant pretty much any variety you want. If you're Palm Beach County and south, you can plant any kind of mango you want, especially if you're east of 95. Avocado, people love. There's a bug going on. There's an invasive insect that spreads a disease. We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. It's early.
Oof.
Yeah.
Jackfruit. I strongly recommend you start with a J31. Really nice variety to start with.
Jackfruit's classic, man.
Jackfruit's classic. You can use those young seeds for starch and carbs.
Tell 'em,
You can
man.
use that plant. You cook with it. Totally underrated is using like spicy stuff and then like mushrooms and savory flavors with jackfruit. You can do a lot.
That's cool.
What else is cool?
Yeah, jackfruit.
I'm
trees
not
are good.
prepared for this.
No,
at all.
no, it's
Plant
cool.
trees. Try
Yeah.
everything.
I like to get nerdy. I'm like, which ones,
Well, and then so here's the other thing I love to do lately. So I just installed the project I was celebrating from 5 to 11 last night.
I love how you're so specific.
It's just because I was like, okay, I'm going to bed.
Okay.
Like,
You're the Ron Swanson of gardening.
well, we all go through our 20s. In our 20s, we pretend we're not in our teens, and like all good teenagers, you pick a fictional character that you want to be.
Interesting. How old are you now?
36.
Cool, man.
36. It's actually my partner's
And
birthday. She's 37 today.
Happy
we were
birthday.
the same age for
What's
like
her name?
4 weeks. Christy.
Christy,
Christy.
shout out.
She's a head gardener down at Pinecrest, village of Pinecrest.
Cool, man.
Yeah. Again, her not the same opinions as me. She's very nice and sweet.
That's got to be a good dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she's brilliant. So again, with this industry, right? There's always these different kind of people. She went for fine art and film, and she did a number of like sculptures, multimedia work.
Cool, man.
She did it for about 2 years down in Miami, and I don't know if it was pretty cool in my 20s. And, I spent some time down there in the art scene and different stuff. She appropriately was a little skeeved out by it eventually. And you know how it can be, right? With like fancy people in Miami and
Yes.
the crazy art scene. And so she went to get some horticultural certifications, ended up interning at Fairchild, working with Dr. Campbell.
Epic.
She's good friend, and
She
she
learned a bunch
turned her
about-
whole career into it. And between the art,
No way.
having, because she took a number of science classes too, and then she took all the horticulture classes, and the Fairchild, and she's been doing this for like 15 years. But she's an unbelievable gardener.
Dude, so cool. 15 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Dude, so cool. It went from media to all in, working with Richard Campbell.
Well,
Mango season. Doing
the thing is, there is an aspect to that, the art, the history, like this multidisciplinary approach, especially when it comes to, I think, design, some of the high-end work, and then
Interesting.
being able to kind of interface between the high-end and some of the more community-focused, volunteer, charitable work. It creates this dynamic that kind of allows you to flow. I feel I'm very multidisciplinary, very like well-rounded with a lot of this stuff. So it's like, I have rough hands. I try to think broadly and well, see a therapist,
There you go.
but it's all this stuff.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You pull from all of it, for your work.
Well, and it's especially, there's still a business aspect to this. Politically, I don't hew very well to what it takes to succeed in business, but I live in the real world and I have people I'm responsible to. Got to give the client what they want. And it helps
Facts.
to be able to broadly understand where they're coming from and the things that they don't know that they want.
Yeah,
Especially with these high-end clients.
That's an interesting take. The things that they don't even know they
I can't
want.
sell
That's interesting.
bullshit.
Yeah, that's it.
I have to sell like actual. Well,
Hey,
I mean,
do
I
you
guess
really
what we do,
wanna
I do sell bullshit because of the
What do you-
nature
what
of
do you mean?
compost and manure.
That's right.
Yeah.
But hey,
It's a wrong expression.
that's the fact is that we can't. What am I trying to say? We're like, if someone's bringing up a poor idea or a bad practice, saying, hey, why don't we consider doing something else? Like, even though they're coming from that, like, I don't know, just showing, like, exactly what are the best practices, bringing that to our work.
I always try to be understanding. I always try to, like, I'll get a little personal here. Like in my 20s, I had about, I think, like a year and a half. I could barely get out of the bed or off the couch.
What was that?
Well, just depression, all kinds of stuff. I had some serious loss some years ago, and then COVID damaged my first business quite a bit. And like many men, I thought I knew everything. I thought it's really, we all have limits to our knowledge. I think part of maturity is realizing
Humbling us.
where they come from, where they're at. I can get really passionate.
Yeah.
I've been pretty good, but I can get real unhinged about different things. The reality is, people have a hard time. This is a country with a lot of material success, not a lot of spiritual grounding, a lot of grifting, con artistry, and lies. I mean, not to be terrible. It's just, and I think there's an aspect where, but there's a lot of money, and people want to buy their way out of that, and not to be weird and not to be too aspirational, but it's kind of like a sense of, I guess if this is a market economy, shouldn't they be able to do that? Like, shouldn't people be able to spend some of their money on something that they feel is like honest and good? And I try and approach it like that too, because this is a separate thing, but I think there is a number of like heartfelt, sensitive, older and successful people that they look at the world and they're like, okay, like I want to do something.
Totally.
And a lot of the companies they don't always offer that. And I try to, and I know Ben does, and I know with what you do with food, again, it creates like that connecting relationship.
Shout out Ben and
but
all the
it's-
edible landscapers, baby.
All the edible
Yeah.
landscapers.
Because that does matter, dude, what you're talking about. Yeah. The next generation, man.
Well, and there's a lot.
Of plants.
There's a lot of edible. Well, so here's the other thing. So, oh my God, so I forgot. So the thing that I've been doing lately, it's these hedge lines with trees in them.
Cool.
It's you do like a double hedge line if you have the space, single hedge line if you don't.
I love that.
And then you put trees every now and then in between. There's something called, I'm going to look this up real quick so I don't screw up his name.
Yeah, go for it.
Would make me feel a little.
I like that, man. It gives you privacy and fruits.
Yeah.
Is
Well-
that the idea?
Well, so first of all, this is embarrassing. So there's Miyazaki, who does all like the wonderful films, Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, stuff
love
like
him.
that. Yeah. But there's Akira Miyawaki, who was a brilliant Japanese ecologist, and he developed a reforesting method that's pretty heavily used in the equatorial world and in much of Asia today. And it's a reforesting method that involves dense plantings of trees. It's actually really a 3-layer process where first you do trees, you allow them to compete, you start selecting out, you start putting in shrubs the second year, and then the third year you start putting in your forbs, your grasses, your flowers, things like that, as the trees start to gain height, and you keep selecting out until it develops a natural forest system. So there's an inspiration there.
Cool.
I often design my systems for succession, which there's a little controversy there, but quite frankly, isn't the point of this to create a landscape, a true landscape? And it's
A landscape.
these dense plantings, planting of trees in the shrub, or I mean in the hedge lines, which creates these nice windbreaks, pesticide blocks, and also creates wonderful habitat. And so if you hedge out your property and you put in these trees, and then you can start putting in your fruit trees on the inner line, there's even other things you can do. You can build up a berm. This is something we talked about doing at my partner's house, but go in a different direction.
To have the water.
You set up a large berm, maybe about 2 feet high, maybe 3 feet wide, and that's where you plant your native shrubs and trees. You ring the property. Then on the inner layer, and again maybe 1 foot high, and again that's where you put your a mix of shrubs and like real producers. You know, your jackfruit, your mangoes, your avocados, stuff that just creates tons of stuff. And then you put in a smaller native hedge line with the small native trees. You have stuff like the blollies, the ironwoods, things like that. And what it does is that creates kind of a productive, very productive edge, creates an edge effect, but it also creates for your property, again, there's that windbreak and that pesticide break, you know, that anything. There's also something called integrated pest management, IPM. And so what happens is you're creating an ecosystem where birds love people's crops a lot of times. But if you have some of these natives, they'll go for that first. Right. It's also you're bringing in birds that might be nesting. And what do nesting birds want? They don't want berries because it's just carbs.
They want
and
caterpillars.
Fiber. They want caterpillars. They want insects. They want food for their young. Creating that system also brings in, especially if you create that final flower layer on the inside. And I'm saying you can do this in any agro, permaculture, regenerative gardening, whatever it is. You can pop this in. You can even pop it in on smaller scale.
Cool.
And then you get those predatory insects in there.
Let's go.
The gross stuff I have seen happen, everything from like caterpillars to Sri Lankan beetle, to like the gross stuff I've seen happen to pests in my yard is something to behold. You ever seen the caterpillars with the little worms coming out?
Yeah.
And that's the sarcopid or bracopid wasps. They're laying eggs inside the caterpillar.
That's right. They like the gaillardia, I think.
And a lot of the small wildflowers, the small meadow wildflowers, help support the predatory insects. Yeah. Dragonflies, ladybugs. I mean, those are famous. World famous.
Yeah. Beautiful, Dane. Integrated pest management. Dane, you threw down today. I appreciate you coming out. What else do you have for the people out there, man? And we'll have to do this again.
Well, and I guess I should have done this at the beginning. So my name's Dane Boggio. I'm the owner of I'm the owner of Humble Thumb Gardens. I was largely academic when I was younger. That being said, my first job was carrying buckets of nails and tar up and down a ladder at 12. So I always had that going on. I went to school for creative writing and English lit, and I focused a lot in theater, especially like turn of the century and like Greek tragedy and stuff.
You're creative, man.
I tried to work in an office. I tried to work in an academic life. It did not take. And for a long time, I worked construction and did a lot of gardening at home. Always loved growing tomatoes and always loved growing that other thing. And
tell us, what's your business name again? So
Humble Thumb Gardens.
Humble Thumb.
And it's over time. I went from, I started dipping my toe into being a real gardener. I got hired on by a native landscaping collective, and I ended up working with a local gentleman, Jeff Nurge, owner of Native Choice Nursery, which is like an absolutely worth checking out for any of the listeners. Worked with Jane Thompson at Indian Trails Native Nursery. You got to check these people out. And then, of course, there's the Native Plant Society, which is the third Tuesday of every month at Mountains Botanical Garden. But I started getting involved in this, and in the last couple of years, I've gone more into garden design, real consulting, running crews. It's been really a privilege. I tried to work retail in the retail nursery sector for a bit, not for me. Now I'm growing some rare and endangered plants and flats. I've tried to do a lot, but one of the things that we're aiming for long term is essentially like one stop shop, boutique concierge gardening, whatever people are looking for. I have the connections. I'm happy to pass off jobs. Like that's the other thing. If it's not what we do, which again is mostly the either ecological restoration or the fine gardening with a native selection. And then I'm also working on something called the Pineapple Project to get pineapples into people's yards so they can feel confident about growing food, right? Great starter plant. And
Awesome. Pineapple Project.
and who knows? Who knows what the future holds?
Who knows what the future holds?
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
Really
dude.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, thanks for coming
you.
out. See you guys.